Hello, my name is Bill Vassar, and I'm here to help you prepare your domain controller to serve LDAPS so that you can use it to connect to your secret double octopus deployment, which I will refer to from now on using the acronym SDO. By default, Active Directory only hosts connections over port 389, which is the plain text LDAP connection, and in order to get Active Directory to host LDAPS, you need to provide it with a certificate to use. Active Directory doesn't offer a certificate wizard like IIS does to provide an easy solution for importing a certificate, so we're going to walk through the process of getting a certificate authority installed on your domain, getting it configured, and using it to issue a certificate that you can import into your Active Directory. As you can see here, we have a plain lab environment with a very simple AD setup. It has an OU that I've set up, which contains the users I wish to protect with SDO, and a place where we can place service accounts, which is where we will place our SDO bind user, which I will cover later in this video. To begin with, we're going to start by installing Active Directory certificate services by going through the Server Manager's Add Roles and Features wizard. It's literally the first role on the list. We'll choose to go ahead and let it install the features it wants to add. That's fine. What it will ask you first as part of it is what components of the certificate authority that you wish to install. For what we're looking to do here, all you need is this first one that's checked by the default, which is the certification authority. If you want to start looking at using your certificate authority to do other things, you can certainly install these other components, but for what we're looking to do here, it's really not necessary. So this installs just like any other role, and we'll go through the setup on this in a bit. For the sake of time, we will go ahead and skip through the installation process here until we're ready to begin configuring the service. So as you can see, Certificate Services is now installed, and the Server Manager is giving us a warning that there are some additional steps necessary to configure Certificate Services on the server. And it's important that you do this step. If you don't, when you attempt to open Certificate Services, you'll get a warning that Windows can't open the configuration because there's a file missing. You can actually see that there's a link here where you can go ahead and click to go into the configuration, which we will do in a moment. But in case you forgot to do this and you didn't read this page and you just closed it, you'll see up here in the Server Manager that there's a little notification icon next to this flag. You can also click in there and go into finishing the configuration of the certificate services. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. What you see here is just a basic first-time walkthrough to configure the root domain and the service accounts for your Active Directory. Because this is a lab environment, I'm not going to do any customization through this wizard, but if you intend to use certificate services for other things, you may want to change some of these values. It's really up to your usage, but for the purposes of getting a certificate for LDAPS, you really don't need to change anything on these screens. So I will go ahead and use the default account. If you wish to issue your own service account for this, you may. We tell it we want to go ahead and configure the certification authority since this is the only one we installed. Obviously, if you installed another component, you'll have the option to configure those as well. Not needed for this particular procedure. We're looking to set it up as an enterprise CA. This will configure the certificate authority to be ready to issue certificates within your network. You can also set it up as a standalone CA if you wish. Either will work fine, but for the purposes of continuing this walkthrough, we'll set it up as an enterprise CA. This will be a root CA as it is the only certificate authority within the domain. And we wish to go ahead and create a new private key because we don't already have one. The defaults are fine here. It will encrypt new certificates with SHA-256 and a key length of 2048. That's all fine. And this will be the data that is configured for the root certificate, which the certificate authority will generate and install into your group policy. This certificate will actually be distributed through the domain to all of the workstations that are joined to that domain so that the workstations on your domain will trust any certificate signed with this root. It's really up to you whether or not you wish to customize this. It's usually fine the way it is. The validity period of the certificate is really up to you. So it depends on how often you are worried about this particular certificate being compromised and how often you want to have to go hands-on with this particular certificate authority. You could set it to 6 months, you could set it to 100 years, it really doesn't matter. The difference being is that when the root certificate expires, you will need to issue a new root certificate with the certificate authority, and you will also need to reissue any certificates signed by that root certificate. So if you set this period to a very low time interval, you'll have to manage and be hands-on with the certificate authority more often. The default can be fine. You can set it to whatever you want, 30 years, 5 years, whatever. We'll go ahead and say next. The database location, database log location is up to you. You can store them wherever you like. And we'll go ahead and click configure. Okay, now that the configuration has succeeded, we can go ahead and close this and actually open the certificate authority. You can use it to, you can search for it using the Windows Start menu by just typing in certification, and Windows Search will find it. Or you can also find it under Windows Administrative Tools. Now that the certification authority is configured, we can go ahead and open it and begin configuring it to be ready to issue a certificate that we're going to need. Out of the box, it comes with several certificate templates it's ready to issue. There are more that can be configured for it, and we're actually going to duplicate one of those templates to use for LDAPS. And to do so, we right-click the certificate templates node or folder, depending on how you like to think of it, and go to Manage. And you can actually see all of the different types of certificate templates which your certificate authority can be ready to serve, but for the sake of having less of them, I guess, it doesn't prepare them all right out of the box. So what we're actually going to do is to duplicate the Kerberos authentication template and make some modifications to it, and that will be the template that we use. So I'm going to right-click the Kerberos authentication template, and we'll say duplicate template. And it'll begin asking us, what changes do you want to make for this? We're going to start by going into the General tab and changing its template display name. You can change it to whatever you want. This is just a label for the template, but you could call it SDO certificate, or you could call it LDAPS certificate. Since this is being used to host LDAPS and not necessarily anything particularly for SDO, I prefer to call it the LDAPS certificate. What we're going to do is go under request handling and check the box that says allow the private key to be exported. And we're going to go into subject name, and we're going to choose the option to supply the subject name in the request. And we'll cover why we're doing this in just a moment. It will give you a warning that this can be a security risk, because essentially it is allowing you to request a certificate for any name using the certificate authority. That's what we're going to need for this. So you're going to go ahead and say okay, and save that, and you'll see that your new certificate template appears at the bottom of the templates list. So that's fine. We can go ahead and close the certificate templates console. And back in the certification authority, under the certificate templates, we're going to click somewhere in this empty white space area, and we're going to say new certificate template to issue. And we're going to choose the certificate template you just created and say okay. Now, out of the box, your certification authority is ready to issue a certificate using the template you just provided it. So we're actually done with the certification authority at this point, so we can go ahead and close this window. And we're going to begin working on the certificates directly. The best way to do this is to go to the Windows Run command and type in mmc.exe and hit OK. It may prompt you for admin credentials, it may not. And you're going to go to File and Add Remove Snap-in. The snap-in that we're looking to add is the certificate snap-in. Try to make sure that you don't actually confuse it with the other two snap-ins that start with certificate. All we want is the one that just says certificates. When we add it, it's going to ask, under what scope do we want to look at certificates? And for this one, we're going to say computer account for the local computer and say OK. So we're going to go ahead and open this up and go under personal and certificates, and you'll see there is a certificate here already, but that's not the one we want. We'll right click the certificates node, go to all tasks and request new certificate. And it will begin walking us through a wizard that will allow us to request a certificate from the certificate authority we just installed. So we'll go ahead and accept the enrollment policy. That's fine. And it will ask us, what of these 5 certificates do you want right now? And you'll notice it's not all the templates that we looked at earlier. These are just the ones that it's willing to issue using this wizard. We're going to choose the certificate template that we just created, which is the LDAPS certificate. And you'll notice it says it wants more information. And the reason it says that is because we modified that subject name tab in the certificate template that we would supply the subject name in the request. So we'll go ahead and click on this link here, and it'll ask us what subject name we want. Now, it is of note that although there is no certificate wizard in Active Directory that matches what IIS provides, certificates in LDAP do still follow the same rules as a general website. So if I'm trying to reach your Active Directory at ad.mycompany.com, the certificate on LDAPS needs to protect that name, ad.mycompany.com. So what you'll do here is under subject name, you'll change the type to common name, and you'll actually type in the name that you're going to use to connect to this Active Directory. And you are going to need to publish a DNS entry for this publicly, because our SDO install is going to need to know a name to contact your AD at. The certificate that's installed on the AD needs to protect that name. Whatever you call it is really up to you. So you could call it sdo.mycompany.com. You could call it ad.mycompany.com. I don't necessarily recommend using the name ad. Because that kind of indicates a high value target that people might want to start looking at. If you've set up your firewall rules correctly, you won't really have to worry about it, because it'll only be our SDO server that can reach it anyway. But at the same time, it's best not to advertise that kind of thing. So if you want to call it sdo.mycompany.com or whatever subdomain, whatever DNS name you want to give it, is really up to you. I'm going to use the name sdo.mycompany.com and add that to the list. So that is now a common name that this cert will protect. And we'll hit OK. And now it's not complaining about the certificate anymore because we've supplied the information that it needed. And we'll hit enroll. That finishes very quickly. And now we have a certificate that protects sdo.mycompany.com. And it is signed by the root certificate that your certification authority has issued. So what we're actually going to do now is export both of these certificates, because right now this certificate is in your computer's certificate store. We're going to need to actually install that to your domain services certificate store. So I'm going to go ahead and right click this certificate I generated for SDO, go to all tasks and export. And we'll click next. And we do want to export the private key on this one, because Active Directory is going to serve this cert. It needs to know what the private key for the cert is going to be. The default options are fine here. And because it is going to include a private key, you have to protect it in some way. Whether or not you use group or usernames or a password is fine. Most people just use password. We will not need to know what that password is. This is just for your own internal use. So I'm just going to make mine very simple because this is a lab environment. And hit next. And it asks me where I want to export the file. So I'm just going to stick it on my desktop. You stick it wherever you like. And I'm just going to name it sdo.mycompany.com. And click next and finish. What we're also going to need is the root certificate, because whenever you actually configure SDO to point to your Active Directory, you will be asked to upload a certificate for it. The root certificate is going to be the one that we're after. It's used to establish a chain of trust so that when SDO connects to your Active Directory will serve up this sdo.mycompany.com certificate. And in order for SDO to know that it should trust that certificate, it needs your root certificate so that it can establish that chain of trust. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this SDO cert. In the certification path, it will show the parent, which is what I am referring to here as the root certificate. I'll go to View Certificate, Details, and Copy to File. And we're just right back in the certificate export wizard. In this case, we're not going to need a private key, so it's not offering us a PFX. A PFX is essentially a zipped certificate and key combo together. But for this one, we don't need a private key, so we're going to export the base 64 encoded X509 cert and hit next. And you can again save this wherever you would like, but just to make sure that we're not confusing it with the SDO private key cert, I'm just going to name it root certificate, assuming I can spell it correctly, and hit next, and the export is done. So now we have an export of the root certificate, and we have an export of the certificate and key combo for sdo.mycompany.com. So we're actually going to close this snap-in by going to File and Add Remove Snap-in. We're going to click on this snap-in that we've already created and hit Remove. And we're going to re-add the certificate snap-in. And it seems weird that this is necessary, but it is, because this time we're going to connect to a service account and not the computer account. And the service account that we're going to connect to is Active Directory Domain Services. So what you will see here is that Active Directory also has a certificate store that we can play around with. What we're looking to do is to import that SDO cert that we created into ntds/personal. So you can right-click ntds/personal, all tasks, and import. And we'll click next here, and it's going to ask us what file we want to import. Now you'll notice by default, it's only showing me the root certificate. For some reason, the import wizard does not show PFX files as part of its default file filter. You'll need to change the file filter here to show PFX files. This is the cert we actually want to import. We'll hit open. Now it's going to ask for the password because we used a password to encrypt this PFX. And whether or not you mark the key as exportable is up to you. It really doesn't matter. You could always just reconnect to the local computer certificate store to export it if you want, or just hold on to this export file. So we'll hit next, place all certificates in the following store. That's fine. And finish. The import was successful. So now we have certificates under here. We've got the root certificate and the SDO certificate. Now we've got a certificate installed into our Active Directory. It's ready to serve LDAPS, but it might not be yet. Just to be sure, what we're going to do is click Start and go to Services. We're going to find Active Directory Domain Services and restart it. And it'll ask if you want to restart a bunch of other services that rely on it, and you can say yes. It will go through stopping and restarting those services. When Active Directory Domain Services comes back up, it is now ready to accept LDAPS connections. What we're going to do now is, you may have noticed that on the External AD screen that we're asking you for a lot of information. And what I'm going to do is show you how to obtain that information and be ready to actually set up SDO to connect to your External AD. The first two fields ask you for a user DN and a user DN password. Just in case you're not sure, the acronym DN stands for Distinguished Name. So what this is essentially asking for here is an administrative user which SDO will use to bind to your LDAP. So to start with, I'm going to create a service account that SDO will use. So I went into my service accounts OU. I'm going to create a new user here. You can call it whatever you'd like. I'm just going to call mine SDO admin just for simplicity's sake. It's always good to name your service accounts to be related to the service they're tied to. You give it whatever password you want. This is going to be the user DN password. In order to bind to this user, you will need to provide that password to SDO. Uncheck that the user needs to change their password at the next login. Make sure you check that password never expires, and we'll click next and finish. As you may be aware, SDO is capable of changing users' passwords. In order to ensure that it's actually allowed to do this, what you'll need to do is give your SDO admin account domain administrator. So we'll go into member of and add it to the domain admins group. So now I'm going to show you how to find distinguished names. And there are a number of different ways to do this. I'm just going to cover my favorite. There's a command line tool that you can use for it as well. It's really up to you. But one of the things I love doing is I'll go to View and advanced features. And you'll notice now all of a sudden Active Directory is showing you a bunch of stuff in your Active Directory that you had no idea was there. There are a number of hidden containers and OUs that Active Directory uses for its own internal purposes. I don't recommend screwing with those. But whenever it comes to looking at the raw data of a user or any kind of object within Active Directory, this is a good way to do it. And this is going to be the method that we use to find the distinguished names of our users and OUs. So I'm going to go back into Service Account and look at this SDO admin. And you'll notice that there are some more tabs in here now. The one that we're interested in is the attribute editor. Depending on what services that you have installed in your Active Directory, the schema might be a little different. Just to make it simple, I like to change the filter to show only attributes that have values. And that way it doesn't show you all the things that don't have any values. And you'll notice one of the things in the list is a distinguished name. You can actually double click this and copy and paste it out into a notepad or whatever note-taking method that you have, or you can just copy and paste it straight into the External AD setup wizard. So when External AD asks you what the user DN is, this is the value you will put in. It is the LDAP path to this object in Active Directory. The same also applies to OUs. In the setup wizard, it asks you for a base DN, and this is essentially going to be a search base for the users that you're looking to protect. It does search downwards in the hierarchy. Any sub OUs that I put in there will also be found by SDO. For simplicity's sake, I just created a simple OU with 5 users in it. It is important that these users have email addresses. SDO keys its users off of email address, not user principal name. So I'm going to use this as my search base, and to get its distinguished name, it's going to be the exact same that we did with the SDO admin account. I'm going to right click it and go to properties and go to the attribute editor, and there's its distinguished name. And this is what it will be looking for base DN. NetBIOS name is actually pretty easy. You can just go into the properties of any user and go to the account tab, and whatever it says here in the user login name is the NetBIOS domain name, just without the slash. So in this particular example, it would be my domain as the NetBIOS domain name. The host name and URL will depend on the DNS name that you've published and the certificate name that you put onto your AD. And where it asks you to upload a base64 encoded certificate, you will supply the root certificate that we exported earlier. Once done, you should be able to open up a firewall rule to our SDO server so that we're actually able to contact your AD on port 636. The IP address to open is included within our documentation. Once you've done that, you should be able to click the test connection button, and assuming everything succeeded, you're ready to go. So if you have any questions, please contact us. We'd be happy to help with any issues you might have. Thanks for watching.